Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. First, I would like to thank everybody for taking time out of their busy schedule tonight to join us. For those that are not able to join us, we are recording tonight's session, and we will be providing a summary in Spanish for those who do need it afterwards. I do want to take time to introduce to you our team that we have here. So I'm Katie DeSanza. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Student Services. Tonight we have with us Ed Pazinski, the Assistant Director for Special Education. I have Anna Hamilton from Frost Academy. Paige Powell, Department Chair at East. Laurel Groger, our Department Chair at South. Lisa Murphy, our Department Chair at West. And Claire Emfield, our Department Chair over Transition Services and Vocational Services. So we're really glad again that you were able to join us tonight. I did want to first start by saying we're going to go through a presentation to provide you with some information. And I'm going to go ahead and share that right now, so please be patient. Okay. Apologize, I'm trying to minimize them as much as possible. So tonight, I'm sure that you're all aware that as a district, we've been working really tirelessly to come up with a plan for the opening of the school year. We're entering into what can only be described as a very unprecedented start to a school year. And so on top of the district planning, we have been very fortunate to work as a department to try to plan for the school year. In full transparency, we don't have all of the answers tonight. We do have some information that we hope will be helpful as you're making decisions for your child as they start the school year. But there are a lot of things that we are still working on and working through, as well as things are ever changing. And so sometimes, we've started a plan and then some things have changed. And so we're responding to those in live time as things arise and as things come up. Over the summer here, we have worked with not just our administrative team, but we've been very fortunate to be able to work also with our teachers, our teaching assistants, our administrative assistants, and our related service staff, as well as really obtaining some of that valuable feedback that parents, all of you have shared in the surveys, as well as the student feedback in the surveys. And that has really helped us try to develop a plan. We're trying to balance our education for students as well as the safety measures. So with that said, I'll go ahead and move forward. So really tonight our goal is to talk to you a little bit about what the process was and how we came up with kind of our plan so far, clarify information for students that do receive special education services, because there are some things that are a little bit different, and then describe the provisions for safety for students, particularly our students with special needs, because there are some things that are a little bit different and different protocols that we've put in place to support students. So we want to clarify that a little bit for you guys tonight. We also want to talk a little bit about what those student experiences are going to be when they are here at school, and what that's going to look like, because it's going to look very different than any kind of schooling that we are used to or that we would even want. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we can partner with you and enlist your help to really support all of our students and your children. So the process and some information for you. The Restore Illinois has the 5 phases, and a lot of what we can do in the school is really directed by ISB and the phasing, and then also ISB's guidance and the Illinois Department of Public Health, their guidance. And so that does lay the groundwork for what we can do. Right now we are in phase 4, and so the plan that we are talking about tonight really is addressing phase 4 that we're in right now. And so just being mindful that some of these plans can and will change as we move in and out of phases. And so if you remember, Dr. Wallace had talked about earlier in May that really there were 3 things we were looking at. Full virtual, and that's at-home learning completely. That's really like those phase 1 and 2, and some of phase 3. Blended hybrid is parts of phase 3, very, very restricted though. phase 4, and then we can't get into full in-person until we're really in that phase 5. And a lot of this was covered in the principal's presentation, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I'm going to spend more time talking about the things that really pertain to our students and their individual needs. So planning school in phase 4, all of it, like I said, everything that we're talking about tonight is really reflecting that and where we're at right now. We're also preparing for other phases, knowing again that we could be moving in and out and likely will be moving in and out either of phases as the school year progresses. And so those are plans that are also being put in place, but the presentation will really focus on that phase 4. Okay, so what we've kind of heard from parents, and this is exactly like what the principals' surveys had really gathered. We know that you guys want high quality instructional experiences. We know that you really want to restore some of those social contacts for your children. Many of our students have not had much contact with other students unless it's been virtually, and or that social contact has been very different. And so we know, especially in adolescence, how important socialization is, and for a lot of our learners, how much they learn by observing their peers. So we do see that value and understand that that is something that we're trying to be able to match. The structure that for our students, all students and all people, many people benefit from structure, right? But especially our students and our students who do really rely on those routines and structure so that they know what to expect each day, and then they function a little bit more smoothly. So we know that that's something that you guys definitely are looking for. Increased opportunities for students to receive supports. And we heard that everywhere, from students who are mostly supported within general education and needing support from their teachers, to our students who do have the most needs and really do need some additional supports. As you'll find out as we talk tonight, learning this year is going to look very different than the spring. As the spring happened, it was really a crisis situation, and all of this is a crisis, but we've had a little more time to plan. And so the education is a lot more robust and a lot more engaging. And so there's a lot more opportunities that we'll be able to provide to students. We do appreciate your patience and your grace as you understand the challenges that we've been faced with, and that we really are all have the same goal in mind, to educate our students in a very safe and healthy environment. We do know that you do want your children to have the access to extracurricular and social activities, and a lot of that is regulated and decisions are being made. A lot of this presentation tonight won't talk about that, but we do know that that is something as far as especially athletics and extracurricular activities. And then providing options for families to make individualized choice based on student needs, which is particularly important for our students that have unique learning profiles. Some of the factors that we considered as we started going through all of this and the things that we tried to process is that, we understand that the impact this pandemic had on really our most vulnerable population. Students who do need, like, as I said, that predictability, who really do benefit from those teachers who are experts in breaking down information, our teaching assistants who are specialized in supporting our students behaviorally, academically, emotionally, and our related service providers who really have those expertise in occupational therapy, physical therapy, social work, psychology, vision and hearing itinerants. And all of that looks very different when it's in school versus when it's delivered at home. And so we've had some time to try to bridge some of those gaps. We do know that diverse learners really require from that differentiated learning environment. So we want to see how we can maximize that and really provide as much of that as we can in different environments. We know that we need to prioritize in-school learning for these populations based on individual student needs to the greatest extent possible. There's a lot of challenges because we're trying to balance that in the quality education, but also that there are, for the safety guidelines, there are a lot of restrictions in how we can educate and do that safely. And so we really want to make sure that that is definitely a priority, is that safety piece. And then in-school learning will be based on what is allowable under the guidelines and really will be implemented based on individual student needs. So many learners are, they have their own either challenges, their own strengths, and we want to be able to play on those. And so those decisions will be made based on those. So just to give you an overview as far as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, there are really not very many things that were put in place that were flexible during this time. And so we do know that all of our timelines, we still need to meet all of those timelines. And so 60 days, school days for our evaluations and our annual reviews, all of those things will be happening the way they typically have. And so those pieces are still in place. We are committed to providing a free, appropriate public education. We know that obviously there's a lot of challenges in the way that we need to provide things right now, but we know that we can meet some of those by being creative. We want to maximize some of our virtual evaluations when we are doing that, but there are times where we actually have to do in-person evaluations. Because there are pieces, either observing a student, having them tangibly be able to work through some processes and procedures. And so we do have procedures in place to be able to do that, but we will try to maximize those virtual pieces and have invested in trying to expand some of the virtual things that we have available so that it does minimize the amount of contact that is needed. And then meetings, parent meetings, domain meetings, all of those type of meetings. Really, we're going to prioritize having those meetings held virtually, but we also have a value on that meaningful parent participation. And so if a parent is not able to meaningfully participate virtually, we are able to have those meetings in person. Now, with that being said, that there could be staff members in that meeting who are participating virtually, so there may be a computer with a staff member virtual, but there will be some people there as well, and they will be socially distanced, masks will need to be worn, and all of the guidelines will be implemented for those meetings. We're going to move into safety of students and staff, and I know that we've had a lot of questions, and I know I've spent, and our team has spent a lot of time trying to figure out some of the nuances of this because they are quite complex. And so some of the answers really depend on individual situations. And in those situations, that's where we're going to have conversations with an IEP team so that we can make the decisions that are best going to support your child. So commitments to students and staff, this is the same thing that our principals communicated. We're committed to social distancing. We know that we have to have so much space between students and maximizing that 6 feet distance to the greatest extent possible. We know that we need PPE, that all students and staff need to wear masks at all time, and I will talk a little bit more about this in a minute. And that individuals that do have medical conditions who are documented and have a physician's note do have exemption for that. And then hygiene, we will follow the guidance very strictly with hand sanitizing, washing, disinfecting, and we've put a lot of cleaning protocols in place. So I'll go through some of that, especially for our students and some of our populations where we have some additional components that we have to factor in. So all of the classrooms are going to have social distancing. Desks are going to be spread out and there will be assigned seats and as close to 6 feet as possible. We're really exploring some different room options and grouping of students because some of our classrooms are small and we want to make sure that we are still adhering to that 6 feet as much as possible. And so that might look like, one class is split into two and some of the students are going to another room. It might be grouping in another area where they're able to work on when they do breakout groups, things like that. So we're really exploring possibly if there's a smaller class, they can use a smaller classroom. If there's a larger class, moving that. So our department chairs have really done a lot and continue to work on trying to prioritize that so that we can maintain those smaller sizes. They vary greatly from class to class because some of our rooms are larger than others. So it's hard to, I know that we had some questions about like exactly how many students would be in the class. Some of our classrooms, even though they might have had 10 students last year, that may be too many students this year. And so we're looking at how we can move those students. But we also have to be mindful of, looking at and waiting for some of the logistics of how many students are going to opt into coming to in-school instruction and how many are going to participate in at-home instruction. So some of that will depend on that as well. But we are committed to that 6 feet as much as possible. Bathrooms are really only available during class. And we do have people who are monitoring the entrance of that, and that it will help with some of our contact tracing. And then obviously for our students who do require personal care and assistance, we have protocol in place, and they will still continue to have that support and assistance. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. There will also be, in order to help support social distancing, there'll be visuals and pictures and signage throughout the school, but particularly in some of our classrooms where some of our students who are still learning and trying to be able to understand the social distancing components and where they're supposed to stand, where they need to go and where they need to follow. So there could be things like arrows for the hallways. We're also looking at, like X marks is on an X mark on the floor and or circle that will help really give that visual support, as well as our visual supports for hand washing, sanitizing. Our staff this summer really did a great job of starting to do some social stories, some visuals, as well as some video modeling we're starting. And so we will be sending some of that stuff to our families that will need it to help prepare students for the beginning of the year, as well as when we're in person, so that we can work with students to be able to practice that safe hygiene as part of their life skills. Students who are medically fragile are students who may have developmental and or sensory, behavioral, emotional factors. We know that there are some other pieces that might be challenges within the school setting. And so for some of our students, maintaining that strict social distancing at all time is not likely to be possible. We have hand-over-hand assistance, we have positioning changes, toileting, feeding, some of our PT and OTs with the work they have to do. But with that being said, we've put in a lot of procedures and protocol to be as safe as possible. We have additional PPE, which I'll talk about in a little bit, for staff members, and to make sure that our students are safe in doing that. And so, we've really taken that into consideration as we've planned. For our students who really have significant medical needs and are considered medically fragile, we will collaborate with parents, our nurses, and then if provided proper consent, we will be talking, with the medical providers to see, number one, is being in person safe for your child? And if it is, what are some of the accommodations and things we can put in place so that we can be as safe as possible for the student and for the staff? And so that's really where we're hoping to collaborate as a team, as well as all of these other pieces. So PPE, all classrooms in the building are going to have stuff for hygiene and sanitation. There is some additional PPE that our staff and students in special education may need. Not all students, but all students and staff are required to wear masks at all times. Students who are unable to wear a mask, there will need to be a physician. There is an exemption for that based on physician and for the school team to consider. But if a student who's not necessarily medically exempt, but I know that we have, we'd be remiss to not talk about the fact that we have students that really struggle because, number one, this is not usual. It's not something that they've practiced in their schooling, throughout the years. They're not used to wearing a mask. There may be sensory needs that really impact their ability to wear a mask, and or even just some of those developmental components that might impact their wearing a mask. Some of the students, we do think that, with collaboration that we can work together to get to wear a mask. And so hopefully that we can work with parents to try to start to do that. But if your child really struggles with that, we are going to ask that you reach out to the department chairs at the buildings. And we have all the contact information at the end of this presentation so that we can really work together for a plan on how we can best support your child. We will be reaching out to families also as the school year starts, obviously, because our teachers and staff, we have to talk just about how we can meet the individual needs. But if that is a concern, the sooner that we are able to partner with you, the better that is. Additional PPE is also being provided in many of our classrooms and dependent on need. So we have gloves, gowns, face shields, clear face masks for some of our students who either have hearing impairment or really rely on those nonverbal cues from the teacher in order to read some of the situations. And then we do have plexiglass dividers. And the plexiglass dividers will assist in when we have a teaching assistant working with a student. There's actually a divider and then it has a cutout below that their hands can work underneath with the students. So if they require hand-over-hand assistance, that can be provided at a safer distance and with a barrier between. So those are some of the things that we've put in place in hopes to try to make this safer for students and for staff. Again, it is not at all typical of what is, you typically would have in our classrooms. And so some of that will be helping our students to understand and learn how it is going to be different. And that's all of our students need to learn how different schooling is going to be moving forward. And so there are some steps in here that we're going to talk about and how they can do that. And then for PPE, for some of our students that are medically fragile, have developmental, behavioral, or emotional challenges, like I said, we are going to be having gowns, gloves. We have protocol for feeding and toileting if that's something that a student does need. And then we do have appropriate PPE that will be used in conjunction with hand hygiene and just sanitation in general. Students who need sensory and or social emotional breaks, we are working on putting some things in place to be able to give those breaks. We don't have an answer yet of exactly how we're doing that, and or especially with like mask breaks and things like that. We know some of our students, especially when they are more challenged with sensory, that is going to be something that they are going to need throughout the day. So we're working on a plan to be able to integrate that in the day in a way that we can safely get in and out. Hygiene. So hand sanitizer and cleansers will be used in all of the classrooms. And for high touch areas, bathrooms and classrooms will be cleaned between like students shifting and or at night they will be doing some intense sanitation. And the principals did talk a little bit more about that as far as the general school, and all of our classrooms would fall under that as well. Equipment and manipulatives in class, we will have to, we have a plan for protocol to clean. Students will not be sharing things that maybe they had shared in the past. And so we will have different ways to clean those in between use and make sure that they're sanitized, and or minimizing to the greatest extent possible anything that would be shared. And so nothing would be shared that hasn't been sanitized. So if it's a marker or something that students may have assigned, things like that, and some materials in their classes. And so we're working on that. We're also working on protocol for our kitchens. There's a lot of different variables with that, and so we're still working on that. School vehicles, and we'll talk about transportation a little more, and just disinfecting protocol in general. We are hoping to try to be able to get outside, weather permitting, for possibly like those mask breaks, and or doing some things outside if it's possible. The challenge is also, though, trying to manage that with all of the students in the entire school. And so those are discussions that we're having and things that we are exploring. So transportation, the district is actively working, and we have the contracted vendors for busing and for individual transport, and we are working with them. We have set protocol, they have protocol, that's all in line with ISB and the Illinois Department of Public Health. And so we are following those, and we're actively in consultation with that. I think the most important thing to know is that if your child does have special transportation, they are going to be provided special transportation as long as that can be done safely. And so there'll be conversations about that with families. But you can also choose to opt out of transportation if your child is somebody who has qualified for transportation on their IEP, but you would rather them not use transportation. So those are conversations as well, and we want you to be aware that you do have those options. Positive cases, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this because the principals did go over. We are still working on our protocol for this, but it's all in collaboration with Public Health Department and the guidance that we've been given. And so there is very clear protocol. We are doing contact tracing. We've had staff that have gone through the training at Johns Hopkins for contact tracing, and that can actually be implemented immediately. And there are some things that have already been done where we've implemented to be able to have that set to go. So next we're going to go to student experiences, and talking a little bit about what a student's day is going to look like and some of the things that we've put in place or plan to put in place for this upcoming school year. So really, as I had said earlier, it's a really delicate balance. We're trying to balance that delivery of engaging instruction that students really can benefit from, and then also paying maximum attention to safety for students and staff. We need them first and foremost to be safe and secure, but we also know that this is critical learning time, And so how can we maximize that the best we can, whether they are learning at home or they're learning here in school. Some of the child's experience, some students' experience will happen at home. There will be some virtual this year. And so there will be some more options though for our students with special education services that I'll talk about, but there will be some virtual online learning, but it will not look like what it looked like in the spring. We've really put in a lot of staff training to make that a lot more robust. So we have planned for as much in-person instruction as possible based on the current state of how things are and safety procedures. But if we do get a spike in things or we move back in phases, that will impact what we have planned and or how we can implement services. So just something to be mindful of. This is the traditional bell schedule for the school. And I know you've all seen this, but I just wanted to provide it here as well. As we are looking at the first couple weeks of school, you know, there's really a thought to have those first weeks there are going to be specific days, and the logistics are still being worked out, but there are going to be specific days for freshmen, senior planning, and, you know, to get students to really learn some of the routines throughout the building and help us gradually introduce students to our building so that we can work out some of those things before we have everybody in the building. Now, with that said, we also understand that some of our populations of students that receive special education services really need to learn the routines, practice those routines, and have some of that exposure early as well. And so they also will start earlier based on their individual needs. So that's not saying that every student who has an IEP will need to start earlier, but some of our students who really need to benefit from that routine and spending that time teaching you know, some of those safety protocols we will be having in the building at that time with, you know, if it's a freshman only day, it will be freshmen, but we will also have some of our students with IEPs in the building as well. And we think that that could be some valuable time to start pre-teaching and teaching these skills. Some additional considerations for students with IEPs. As a district, we're really committed to in-person learning based on individual needs, as I said, to the greatest extent possible that can be done safely and based on the current guidance. Collaboration with families and individual student needs, taking into consideration those individual student needs, is how those determinations will be met. But this could mean where, you know, most students have the option of the hybrid blend, or that's going to be in-school learning, you know, to be there in the A or B day, so really essentially 2 days a week, or to have full in-home learning. In-home learning will still be an option for our students with IEPs, but there also will be, you know, based on students' needs, the option to be, and through the decision of the IEP team, for students to be here 4 days a week, and that would be Tuesday through Friday. Some of the logistics of that are still being worked out, because we need to know how many students are opting in person, and then how many students are going to be doing the at-home learning. But we will have that's a little bit different. So on the survey, when you have to make your decision, you can, if you want in person, you can opt in for in-person instruction. Obviously, I know it doesn't indicate that this would necessarily be an option, but our teams will be collaborating with you to see about that 4-day option and if that's a fit. For some students that may have an IEP who are mostly accessing general education, they may not need that full 4 days in order to access and benefit from their education. And so it may be that they are still here those 2 days, or maybe it's an additional period or something like that. There are definitely a lot of logistical challenges with the 4 days, but we are committed to trying to figure some of those out. And as we have some of that information, we will communicate that. School entry routines, this is similar for all of our students. There's a self-certification basically indicating that no symptoms are present and or that you haven't been around anyone who has been tested positive. There's a whole symptoms checklist. Some of the logistics and the specifics of that are still under construction, but there's, you know, we're thinking of have some kind of show verification. We do know that some of our students, if they didn't have that, may struggle with the self-certification piece, so we would have assistance for that. Again, our teachers and teaching assistants are here to support students, and we want to make sure that we do that in the best way we can. Students will be assigned to an entry area. If a student is bused, that will be where they're dropped off. If they're being dropped off by a parent, there are going to be set areas where students are dropped off and then they go to their route to their class. And that's some of that working with students to know where to go that we will work on. Hallways and stairwells are single direction for the most part, and trying to maintain distancing to the greatest extent possible. Classroom experiences. So during in-class, social distancing is going to be practiced from teacher to classmates and classmates to classmates. Now again, we obviously, and even like that collaboration piece, you know, desks are supposed to face forward, very different than what, you know, in the past has kind of been what traditional teaching is. We are going to be providing, as I mentioned before, plexiglass dividers when working with students who require some of that hand-over-hand assistance and or one-to-one support. That could also look like some of the teaching assistants working with a student. So I think that, you know, that's another way that we're going to try to support students in the moment, but we are still trying to maintain that distance, but there will be times where that distance will be a little bit less, but there will be additional protocol and procedures in place to, you know, ensure safety. Teaching assistants will continue to support students' learning, and masks, you know, are required at all times, again, except for medical exemptions, and we'll be working with students for additional plans as well. Lunches, at this time, the plan is for students to eat in class, except in circumstances where it might be necessary to eat in another designated area that will maintain safety protocols, but that would be assigned areas, so students would know where they're eating. Most students will be eating within their classroom. Students can still order food from Quest, and that food will be delivered to the classroom. They will receive that food. Sorry, my light just went off because I didn't move too much. You can order food from Quest. Students can remove masks really only when they're eating. So, you know, as you saw in the principal's presentations, it literally is taking the mask off to eat and then putting it back on. It's not that the mask is off during all of eating. Obviously, if there's a student that gets assistance with feeding and or needs additional personal care during that time, we'll be working with students and their team to be able to address those needs in a safe manner. Additional PPE for staff and students supporting, additional PPE for staff supporting students who require that. And then really we're looking at lunches at like really the last 30 minutes of that second block of the day. Self-directed spaces, so the cafeteria and library are used as assigned spaces, whereas before students could go to those spaces at any time. There are no spaces in the buildings where students will be able to go whenever they want. All students are going to be assigned spaces. Obviously, like with related service and stuff like that, those will be scheduled appointments and working with related service providers. So those things will be able to happen, and or working out a plan if you have a child who does experience a lot of anxiety and stress, and how to access that support during the day. There are no lockers for PE and changing, so you know, that's one of the factors that we've had to take into consideration. Students can come late or leave early if they don't have an assigned class at the beginning part of the day or the ending part of the day. With that, though, you know, if they were to leave early, if the student does receive transportation, special education transportation, that would still be at the regular time. And so that would either have to be parent pickup or they would wait and we would find a space for them to work during that time and maybe get additional support. And then we're still working on other services and supports that we can offer students throughout the day. Instructional practices. We've had a lot of more intense ongoing professional development for our teachers, teaching assistants, related service providers over the summer here, and will continue throughout the school year to help make the instructional experience more engaging for students. Again, like I had said before, what you saw in the spring is not what the learning is going to look like this year. There's going to be a lot more synchronous learning and not as much of that asynchronous learning. There's going to be a common platform across you know, all teachers and disciplines are going to be using Google Classroom in order to support. So students and parents don't have to navigate multiple platform sites to find assignments and information. And some of that will be teaching routines to our students about going into there, and, you know, at least it's one central hub. Grades. count. So we are going to be taking grades. You know, there was that exemption in the spring that grades the hold harmless. And so this year, those students will be earning grades and we'll be working with students, and then attendance will be taken. And so those are a little bit different from some of the things in the spring that you can expect in this coming year. Instructional practices, delivery of instruction for related services, particularly. So for our students who receive related services, I'm sorry. So for all of the instructional practices, we are going to be collaborating with families. That is going to be IEP teams collaborating together to decide what the students need, what kind of accommodations, modifications, what changes may need to be made to the IEP, and really working on that. Accommodations and modifications can be provided really regardless of the setting, but how that looks might be a little bit different. So that's something that we want to make sure that we're collaborating and working on together. Related services, they are going to be mostly synchronous as well, which means like in-person live and or virtually live in real time, as opposed to sending out things to the greatest extent possible. There could be some choice boards and things like that, but to the greatest extent possible, we are going to be trying to do in-person and virtual real time to connect with students. And then transition, I'm going to hand over to Claire to let her talk just a little bit about some of the services and supports that we plan to offer in transition. There are some challenges that we've been trying to come up with ideas and ways to best support our students.
Thanks, Katie. So a few notes for students who are receiving transition services.
Hold on, Claire, sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
I apologize for some reason.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. So for our students who are receiving transition services, we have been continually connecting with our community
Claire,
partners.
your voice is not coming through.
Huh. Let's see.
I'll just go ahead and go over. I apologize. I'll go over the transition component. I'm having a technical issue. Okay, hold on. I was told that you guys can hear. It must just be mine. So I'm going to go ahead and mute.
Okay. Well, we have been continually connecting with our community partners. We have several in the community that we work with for special education experiences for students who are working on their vocational experiences, and connecting with those partners to take a look at how we can just diversify those and allow for a range of options to continue to have students engage in that learning. It might look a little bit different in that we might increase how many different options we have on our own district campuses, or we might modify some off-campus experiences to continue with that learning. And as well as always taking a look at what the individual student needs along their path of preparing for their future. And then, of course, we're going to keep an eye on the safety when we have any of our decisions made about how we're going to develop the procedures and as we plan for each student. The other piece that we've been looking at in transition is we have several new curriculum materials that we are going to be using new this school year. We have been using an ESY, so some families might have seen those. These are great resources that we had in mind that also happen to lend themselves to a virtual environment in case a student might access it that way. They also provide for some great opportunities for students to differentiate, and so teachers can assign different pieces that apply to the individual student. And those include things like the interview training tool that you've seen in several of our classes, or video modeling that we'll be using that focus on both job tasks as well as how to help facilitate independence to adult life. So those are some new pieces that we'll be looking at in transition moving forward. And I'm going to pass it along to Anna, who's going to talk about Frost.
Thank you, Katie. Hi, everyone. I am deeply missing my families and students and hopefully look forward to seeing you in person soon. I just wanted to cover a couple of things specific to Frost. So the bell schedule that students have been used to in the past will be the same bell schedule that we follow this school year when we're doing the in-school learning and potentially having some students join virtually. We'll have our 7-period day with a 15-minute dedicated lunch period, and we will be revamping how we've done lunch to make sure that we're meeting social distancing guidelines. We'll have an adapted check-in process when students arrive to limit close contact between individuals. And we really want to reduce the need for students to access their lockers. So we're going to be encouraging students to really be leaving their personal belongings at home and just bringing their Chromebook in. Depending on the numbers of students in the building, we may look at doing a flex group for PE, but otherwise it's expected that all 7 classes would run those 4 days a week. And some exciting news is we have a large outdoor deck that's currently being constructed right off the entryway, and it's going to give us an awesome area to facilitate kind of an outdoor classroom experience, a great lunch space for our kids and staff, so I'm super excited about that. And lastly, I just wanted to note, since we have so many awesome students who are reintegrated, that I will be working with the families and students to make sure they really understand how to manage their schedule at Frost as well as their classes at their home school. So I know some of you may be wondering about that, and you have my word that we will work it out and that I will give individual attention to sort out those details.
All right, thank you all for being patient with my technology skills here. A lot of pieces to manage, and I don't want it to get disconnected so you can hear everything. So thank you for being patient. As far as our alternative learning environments, this is mostly our private and public day schools. Those plans do vary by school. And so the district is currently receiving those plans and reviewing them, and then we let them know if there, are there any concerns and things like that to work with them on that. So we're currently getting those plans from the different private day schools. A student's placement is outlined on their IEP, is obviously outlined on your IEP, and any changes to that placement would require an IEP team decision. So I know that there's been I've had several questions about placement currently at a private day and or choices in the buildings. And so any change to that would need to be an IEP team decision. Transportation will continue to be provided with safety measures implemented, and parents can opt out of transportation if they prefer to, as we had talked about before. So kind of talking about some of our decisions. So I know that there's a lot of things for you guys to think about as you're kind of deciding whether or not you want to opt into in-school learning and or at-home learning. The surveys were sent on Monday, and we're hoping to get the replies by Monday, July 27th. So as I had shared before, there isn't on that option to say, that you want to be considered for any additional days in school, but you would choose in-person learning, and then our teams would work together with you to determine, those 4 days. Many of our students who do require instructional support, where they're in a special education classroom for a particular class throughout the day, those are things obviously that we are prioritizing to make sure that students do receive those supports and benefit and access their education. In time we could make adjustments to some of our plans, but not to the safety guidelines and or just the basic environments and conditions. You'll have an option to go full virtual or full in-home learning for first semester, and so really looking for a semester commitment for full in-person or full at-home learning. Collaboration. So this is where we're kind of asking to enlist your help. Especially with our students that have such unique needs. The decisions really are so individualized. And so we really need to work with you to decide what is in the best interest of your child and how we can best support them to make sure they're accessing education, progressing on those IEP goals, and able to be successful. And if they are participating in at-home learning, continuing to collaborate with students and families as well. Obviously, they're going to be receiving instruction, a lot of that synchronous activity, communication with the case manager, communication with counselors, related service staff, but having that constant communication. But we want to also ask that you support, the only way that we can have students safely in the buildings is if they're also being safe outside of school. And so we're asking that you please help, with supporting social distancing and having your child wear face coverings. If your child is very adverse to it right now, but is medically able to, it's trying to start working on that with them. I do know that it can be very challenging for some students. So we do understand that stress and that it is a challenge for some of our students. And just the fact that, talk to your child about how school is going to look very different. Unfortunately, given this global pandemic, school, like I said before, is going to look nothing like what we are used to. Desks forward, plexiglass dividers in certain areas, all students wearing masks, possibly face shields for some staff. There's a lot of different pieces, and just some of the routines and hygiene that they haven't been particularly needing to implement are going to have to be implemented. So the more that you can do some of that stuff at home and we can partner on that, we appreciate. So here is the contact information for all of our administrative leadership and special education in each of the buildings, as well as at the district level. We are here to answer questions. I've had some families email myself, as well as our department chairs have already received some emails, and we are happy to help talk through and respond to those. We know that this upcoming year, there's a lot of anxiety about it, and there's just a lot of things that are unknown. And so sometimes even just talking through that, even if we don't know an answer right now, that we're aware of it and that we are actively working on it. So we are going to do a little bit of a Q&A. We did have some questions come in and tried to infuse some of the pieces into the presentation, but I'm going to now turn it over. I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to let my staff here kind of talk through some of the questions and answers that that came through, and we'll answer them to the best of our ability. We will also, because there were a large number of questions, we will also be posting some of those, or going through the question and answer and posting that after. It'll just take us a little while to get some of those up, and then for the ones that we don't have answers to yet, we will let you know that and that we are working on it.
Okay, so I have the first question. Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you to all the families who did provide your questions. One of the ones that came through fairly readily was, can a family decide to switch to in-school learning if they initially selected to do, can they ask to do in-school learning if they initially selected virtual learning, and vice versa? And it would be very beneficial if we could have people commit to something, because that's going to help guide our planning. That said, we recognize that as students resume school after this break, they're going to have different comfort levels, and different things are going to surface for them that we potentially need to discuss. So if there potentially does need to be a change, that would be something that we would discuss as an IEP team to see if there might be some other things that we could do to support the student in what they selected, or whether we would indeed need to make that change.
Okay, I'm going to take a couple questions. One, this was answered, but it was a question about will we provide buses. Just wanted to reiterate that we are actively working with our vendor contracts, our small vehicle vendor contracts or taxis, as well as Subtrain, our bus company. And we have really developed some pretty unique systems about how to best, reroute students. There's still a lot of work in progress on that, so sit tight. If you're a family that receives special transportation, we'll be in touch on that and be communicating out specifically on those needs and those requests. Another question we had was, will the teachers be made aware of students' IEP status? Just to speak more globally to that, that's something that we do in a confidential way through our student information system, through Infinite Campus and our IEP program. We are able to provide teachers with direct access electronically in a confidential way, as I mentioned, to what's called an IEP summary, which hits the highlights of a student's IEP, their goals, their services that they receive, where they're currently functioning, the accommodations and supports that they receive, as well as team members. So we feel pretty confident in how that will continue on, and supporting our students across various settings and with various team members that aren't directly working with students. In a specific special ed environment per se. So those are two questions that stood out to me. So thanks.
We also received a question related to students who are receiving transition services through our transition programming and maybe also taking classes possibly through a secondary institution like Oakton and maybe has, or both, has a job. How would we work with students to monitor their schedule or construct a schedule for them? It would be similar to the school year where a student would share with their case manager at the beginning of the year what their plan is for work or for classes or maybe both. And they would coordinate a time for either the student to meet with the case manager or it might involve the student coming in. But that would be something that could be worked out once the student knows what their plan is and they can share that with the case manager.
One of the additional questions that I noticed just came in asked regarding whether students can get more than 2 days of school. As we said, for some of our populations, the IEP team might determine that they might need up to 4 days of school, and we may be providing that. Then in other cases, if a student is in a position where maybe their general education classes, they go 2 days a week, but their special education classes, they go up to 4 days a week. That would be a possibility too. So those could be some decisions that would be talked about as a part of the IEP team.
Were there any other questions that came in? I apologize, I'm having some tech issues on my end.
I think if we could speak, I think I saw some coming in related to ensuring accommodations would be in place. And just to reassure parents that accommodations for extended time and things like that will be worked out and will be provided to students. And I just also want to reiterate that what we'll do after this session is come up with an answer document that makes sure that all the questions that were submitted to us, both tonight and through the response form, you know, if they weren't covered in this presentation, that they are answered.
Yeah, Anna, good point. And we'll be sure to post those on our main207.org page, and that should be a great place to access information as well as through email.
Okay, again, I apologize. I think I'm having some tech issues on this end and it's all running through my side, so I apologize. I think that we got to most of the, there are some additional questions and we will post with some question and answers. And again, the form is still open. So if this is already said, I apologize. The form is still open, so you can still submit additional questions and or reach out to us for more specific information or as you're making decisions. Is there anything else from the rest of the admin team? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, but I want to thank all of you again for your time, for your collaboration, for your partnership. We really couldn't do any of this without your involvement, so we appreciate it. And even though it won't be a typical school year, we are still looking forward to having students you know, back in the building virtually, however it is, so that we can continue to work with them. So thank you so much for your time.